Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a link down below for officehours.global. You can find out more about how to become part of our little group, how to ask questions, how to become basically a producer, because once you get through the little sign-up process, you decide what we're going to talk about, how we're going to talk about it. So your questions and your votes really drive the conversation. So hopefully you'll join us. The first hour is always general discussion 7 days a week about production. So media production, virtual production. Second hour is usually a little something we're going to spend a little more time on. Every Saturday, we actually spend time talking about education. Emily Russo, who will be hosting the rest of this hour and into the next hour, will be running that discussion. So make sure that you can put questions in for education. Just make sure to tag them. Saturday is going back to the long days. So we have education from 8 to 9-ish, but it could be 9:30-ish. It just depends on how many questions there are. And then at 10 o'clock, no, we're not streaming the education part. We let the teachers talk amongst themselves. We'll turn the stream back on at 10 o'clock with Nick Jushchyshyn. He's going to be talking about Unreal. We're going to move into talking about metahumans next week. In fact, I'll be doing most of that next week, but Nick is going to walk you through his Unreal Fellowship project and show you how he put a lot of the pieces together. It's really fascinating. So it's going to be a great session at 10 o'clock. Then at noon, Damyanti Gajjar is going to be back, and we've been cooking with her. And so we're going to be doing cooking again. So hopefully some of us are going to be ready to have their kitchen ready to go, and they're going to cook along. Well, we're going to do a cook along with Damyanti. Hasmukh has been working on his cameras, and so we're pretty excited about that process. So that'll be noon until 2-ish, 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2-ish, something, whatever it takes to cook the meal. So definitely show up at noon for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions, and I'll hand it off to Emily.
Sir.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're going to jump into our first question, and that comes from Jonas.
From Jonas Dutel in Ruttlingen, Germany. Can we do a second hour on running a media live streaming business for all those people that newly started a business during the COVID pandemic?
Alex?
I think that'd be a great idea. Yeah, so put it into the second hour, and we'll in chat, I'm sure, or not chat doesn't have to do anything, but put it in the second hour, and people should vote that up, and then we'll get it into in the next couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Next question.
Okay, from Jason Sipe in Marietta, California. What is the best device for recording multiple up to 4 video sources onto a single hard drive while encoding the recordings as separate file types? For example, one source as an MOV and another as H.265.
Carl and then Jonas.
So you can use a DeckLink card into either a Mac or a PC, and then each different software looking at the DeckLink card and asking to do different records from that DeckLink card. So essentially you just have multiple software encoding multiple formats at the same time, and they're all looking at the same DeckLink card.
I would try not to do different formats during the recording. Especially what you said in there is one is the container format, and in the container format there could be H.264 or H.265. I would always record in the native format that the software wants, because if you already transcode during the recording, for me that's too much that the machine has to do, and if it fails. For example, MP4 is more prone to failure if the record ends. That's why software like OBS is not recording in MP4, but it's easy to transmux, which basically takes the data out of the container and put it into another container without changing it. So it's not like a full transcode. And I would actually say get an ATEM Mini ISO Pro. You can plug in an SSD and record up to 4 sources.
Great. Dan?
Just curious, why would you want to record in 4 different formats? Is it just so that you have software options for editing later that are different, that natively look at a different file format?
Yeah, if I have students that want to have a finalized product, but also have the individual ISO recordings, I wanted them to be able to have access to multiple different file formats to play with the different file formats.
Sky?
And traditionally, that's the offline online process of lighter files that are easier to fill up a hard drive. It used to be hard drive space that we didn't have enough of, or throughput. And so now that we're going into the cloud as our storage device, maybe you'll want something up there, but when you're finished, you want the biggest, heaviest file with the raw information. So you want a really lightweight thing that everybody can look at, and then the really heavy thing to do your finished product. And that's why it's called editing.
Alex?
Yeah, and also there's a company called Softron that makes a variety of different recording tools, single app that will record 8 sources at one time, or 4 sources. I think there's an Emery like 4 and one that's 8, and it just ingests them all, and you can just decide what is the format. I think you have to do one format for all of them, but it will take 4 sources. You can decide what that is. Typically, we're recording ProRes for it, and it will, but it's a little bit more costly, but turnkey. It'll come with a box that has the card in it, and you plug it in and then just turn it on, and it'll hit, you just hit record and it goes.
Jonas?
Also, since you want different formats at the end, I found using Adobe Media Encoder with a watch folder, for example, and just having a format so the students okay, we're done. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then it's transcoded and we can take our data out here, really helps versus recording it in different formats, because that seems to be hard to do.
TJ?
I would use this as an educational opportunity to teach the students that you are recording into one format, and now you have to take and transcode that or do whatever you need to get it into a different format for other uses.
All right, next question.
Coming in from Guy Cochran in Seattle. With the latest update to Wirecast, is it still considered a worthy piece of production software?
Jeffrey?
So I've been of course I've used Wirecast since 4, and it's served me very well for what I do. For other people, there's hit and misses on many different things. The biggest thing with 14.3 is that they actually did NDI 5.0 because it coincided with NDI 5.0's release. So they're the only software streamer that I know of at this point that can do that. With the SRT integration, there's still problems with Rendezvous, and there's still a lot of stuff that they need to get out. They need to redesign the interface to make it really work, because I want something that I can control with my iPad, just like Mix Effect controls an ATEM Mini, for it to work. And if they can finally get out of those and grow with what we need it for, I think it'll be a good production thing. But it works as a good back end and a good helper for anything that's main production, like a TriCast or doing some external streaming or recording or anything like that.
Alex? Oops, we
Sorry,
can't.
now it's my I got to do that this time. My mic's off. And so anyway, in my opinion, getting stuff that's written for one platform and does really well is going to get a more stable experience. Doing all this video production and making calls to the hardware and everything else is tricky. And I think the fact that it's cross-platform actually makes it harder. I think that, in my opinion, the 2 leaders are mimoLive on the Mac and vMix on the PC. And then you can get, of course, hardware things like Cast. But if you're going to go towards a software one, if I was going to pick on a Mac, I would use Mimo, which is what I use. And then we also use vMix for a couple other things that we do. So those 2, I think, are the 2 most developed, and they're written for their own piece of hardware, and they're taking full advantage of the platform that they're on. And I think that is a huge advantage for each one of those.
Great. Next question.
Coming in from Juan C. Robles in Mexico. The Metahuman and Cooking hours, will those be in webinar or meeting format?
Alex?
They will be in web format at least this week, and we'll keep on playing with what we do it in. The main reason is so that we can easily stream it. But anybody who wants to cook along can raise their hand or be part of the Metahuman, that people can talk about it. So, but they'll be, currently the plan right now is to have them in the webinar, and we're open to suggestion. The Saturday labs are very much an experiment.
Dan?
Curious, is Hosmuk going to stay after his cooking and do like a breakdown of it all like you used to do?
I hope so. I think that at first, just like, we'll see what Hosmuk does on the first one. I think that it's up to him as if he wants to show that. But we'll definitely do more and more of the behind the scenes of how we're doing production. And so I'm sure that he's happy to do it. I think he's shown us a lot. I think for a lot of us, we've seen a bunch of it in after hours. And so of him working through things and everything else. I think if you ask him to at the end of the meal, he'll probably just show it. I don't know how many extra cameras he has, because I think he's using all the cameras for the show. But I think talking through it, I think will make sense.
Great. I'm excited for that. I bought all the ingredients. Next person, or next question, person.
Okay. Next person and question is from Guy Cochran in Seattle. How can we use the remote control function in Zoom to assist in productions from afar?
Rupert?
So this can be useful, the remote control feature in Zoom. I mean, if you are sharing a screen from the far end, you can then request the remote control and get, keyboard and mouse input then it turns it into something much like TeamViewer and things like that. The end user does need to accept it. I haven't seen a way of that being auto accepted yet. Maybe there is, but on the whole, I just don't find it as responsive as almost all of the other solutions. TeamViewer, whatever the other ones are. The Zoom remote control is nice. It's like an added feature when you need it, and it's kind of useful. But if you need something in production, I would just use something that is more responsive more of the time.
TJ?
I think using it to cut a show or something like that probably isn't as great an idea, but what Carl and Tlaloc and Hosmuk did, where Tlaloc was actually controlling Hosmuk's computer, and they were doing the shading on the cameras, and they spent a couple of hours working the camera coloration to match the two cameras that he has. And Tlaloc did all of the work remotely from his mobile home in Minnesota, controlling Hosmuk's cameras on his computer in South Africa. Amazing.
Jonas?
One thing where I could see it getting used more is if they add the ability for a Zoom app to control it, or like for Zoom apps to string together. So for example, we could have a Zoom app that's ATEM control, and the other person on the other side just has to open that Zoom app as well. It connects to the ATEM, and suddenly you can remotely control it directly from Zoom. And but then it wouldn't be just a screen share anymore.
Alex?
See, now I'm getting my own medicine. One of the main reasons that we use it is we send brios out and then request, if the person puts the brio in, we just reframe them. And that on a day-to-day basis, that's super powerful for us. And so to the point where we won't get anything other than a brio because of just being able to make minor reframing of the person.
Sky?
Alex, what software do you use to reframe the brio?
Zoom. So, I mean, Zoom, you can just request camera control, and now you can zoom in and reframe inside of the camera control. You can't color correct it. So most of our kits nowadays have a Mac Mini that goes out with them, so that we do all of that with webcam settings or whatever. But in the tiny little kits that we send out without a Mac Mini, having a brio means that we can zoom in and reframe from Zoom, which is pretty cool. And if you have two brios connected to Zoom, you can switch between the two of them as well.
Do you have two different sources that you're bringing? Because
if you take two USBs into your computer somewhere with two brios,
sure,
a person on the far end can switch your cameras.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Next question.
Coming in from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo. What's the closest alternative to vMix on a Mac? There are some choices, but what matches features and price?
Alex?
I think the closest thing to vMix, it's a very different look and feel, but the closest thing to vMix as far as quality and reliability and usability is mimoLive. So I think that if you're on the Mac, it's a subscription service instead of a one-time cost, but it's very powerful, and it's very, very extensible, and there's a lot of, you can do iPad controls and all kinds of stuff. That's what I use when I'm not using hardware.
No other options? All right, next question.
Coming on from Jason Sipe and Marietta, and here on the panel, should Skype's NDI output be abandoned for a Zoom screen scrape for stability reasons? Is there much difference between a straight NDI output versus a screen scrape?
Jonas?
So one of the difficult things we found with screen scrapes is that there are, like Greg Gibson calls it, debris still on the screen. The cool thing that Zoom now introduced with the Zoom Rooms is for $50 a month, you get 3 NDI outputs. And these are without debris, and then you basically have Skype TX. Or if you want to control it a little bit more with a companion or something, you can use Zoom ISO, which really works great for that. But yeah, I don't think Skype will be there any longer if they really turn it on.
Great. Next question.
From James Fosland in Minneapolis, Minnesota, what is the best way to protect and insure equipment against thunderstorms?
Going back to Mr. Mobley's issue this week, TJ?
Well, there's 2 different things. There's the rain, which keeping your equipment dry is one thing. And I'm guessing he's referring to lightning strike and the power surges that come with that. Having your equipment behind good power conditioners that are designed to fail if they get the spike, that piece of equipment dies before it can pass that voltage spike along up to your computer. APC power conditioners, things of that nature that can handle that type of thing.
Carl?
So there is a disconnect you can get as well. So I know that the newest Tesla Powerwall, it has this built in. It used to be a separate box next to the Powerwall. So these disconnects are actually always there. So you can just run your whole house off the battery. So if there's lightning storms, which you can just have an app. So if there's any lightning storms in your area, you can just do this instant disconnect via the app, and it will just put your house onto battery power for, as long as you need with a Tesla Powerwall or something similar.
Courtney?
The safest way is to just unplug when the lightning storm approaches and is getting close, unplug everything from the wall, because the lightning is very high voltage, can travel down the ground as well as the power lines, and can travel down telephone lines. So if you're hooked up to any cable TV, telephone lines, disconnect it at the wall until the storm passes is the safest way, and then you can plug it back in when it's gone.
Jeffrey?
So if this is the first time that you've ever done this, the first thing you really want to do is get an electrician in there and have your box looked at. Make sure because there was a house I was in. The electrician looked at the box and said, "You realize that this box is actually on recall status, right?" And they actually changed out the box absolutely free with all the correct switches and everything, and ran that fine. So that's the first thing. Second of all, you can have power conditioners, but if you're daisy chaining cables to cables to cables, that becomes not only an electrical hazard, but also a fire hazard as well. You shouldn't put in a surge protector into a surge protector. And of course, if your surge protectors are more than 10 years old, you should get them tested and possibly even completely replace them because they might not be working as surge protectors.
Thank you for that, Rupert.
Yeah, also surge protectors are pretty sacrificial. If you do have a surge or a lightning strike and it saves your equipment, throw them away and replace them. And then on Courtney's point on the disconnecting things, that really is important because switching things off, even if it's a mechanical switch, that's still leaving a gap like this, and lightning can easily jump that. So disconnection, creating a big air gap, is really the best way.
Wow, popular question. All right, next question.
All right, from Matt Wood in Newcastle upon Tyne. Oh, that sounds lovely. Why are Bill and Courtney's voices so perfectly suited to asking questions? Inquiring minds want to know.
They're just born that way. Alex?
Just a register. it's a register there, and age and now, Courtney, did you smoke?
No, I've never smoked.
I don't think Bill has either. A lot of folks, like I remember when I was first doing voiceovers when I was in my early 20s, The guy said, "You'll have a great voice when you're about 60." And he goes, "But 45 if you start smoking now."
Sky and then Courtney.
Well, again, I think as storytellers, we come to find comfort. And I think there is Jeffrey used the term timbre, or the tone of your voice. And I think we've got a long history of that timbre and tone of that person being our narrator or storyteller. And there's an assurance there. So there's probably some psychological effects in there as well.
Yes, James Earl Jones. Courtney and then TJ.
And both of us, having worked in radio for many years, have learned to speak from the chest, and that gives you much more resonance and, is more commanding. And if you speak on the top of your head, then you're not near as commanding.
Yeah, I used to teach theater, and I had a voice coach that would come in and work with the kids because I could never figure it out. And when I first started teaching, I'd lose my voice all the time because I was talking from my throat and not from my chest. And so it's a really interesting skill to learn. All right, next question.
From Guy Cochran in Seattle, what are the benefits of editing in the cloud?
Carl?
You can have multiple editors in there, so that's one benefit. Some people just have an EDL go up to the cloud, so they have the assets in the cloud, or the media in the cloud and the EDL, so you actually do your editing locally, so you can be a bit swifter. But it allows multiple editors to come in, maybe in different time zones.
Jonas?
So AWS is amazing for editing in the cloud. What they have done with Nimble Studio is a simple way to set up your whole, well, simple if you know some of the AWS stuff, but it's like with their editor, it's really simple to set up a whole cloud post-production studio. And one of the cool things that I have found is for fast turnarounds of virtual production. So if all your Zoom ISOs get recorded in the cloud, we don't even bring them down to the ground anymore. They get edited up there. And also I have one as backup always, because I sometimes get a call like, hey, we have to go to home offices now, and that intern should cut a video. And it's like, it's really easy what the intern has to do, but his PC just can't do it. And I'm like, okay, here's Parsec, give me your email address, and 10 minutes later, you're on a really powerful machine, and most of the people don't even notice it. And also working together, I installed Resolve with the Resolve AMI from Blackmagic on AWS for a client. And they were blown away when we started editing together, because with NiceDCV, 2 people can be in the same machine. So it's like really amazing talking about a timeline, because you can just move the mouse pointer to it instead of just screen sharing. And then you're like, yeah, move it a little bit more that. And you're like, yeah, I think we should do the cut here. And you just move the mouse, and then the other person can take over again. I really like
it. Sky.
Well, for me, that's where we originally started with single hard drives, and then we went to a single storage device and multiple computers going into what Avid used to call the Unity system. And then to be able to have multiple clients globally, being able to watch your footage, because that's who you're trying to tell the story for initially, is a producer somewhere in the world. And also many hands make light work. So as been discussed, having multiple editors on a single project means you can be more efficient and quicker in telling your story than the traditional way of one person having the file and then having to consolidate that and send it over to someplace else. So it sounds kind of magical to me.
Rupert?
Also that if it's not something you're doing all the time, then you don't have to pay for it all the time. If you're just doing editing periodically, then you can keep those machines shut down and not pay for them while you're not using them. It also gives you a really good business continuity piece. If your house gets hit by lightning, your editing platform is still stable in the cloud, and you can run down to Starbucks or wherever and just come back into that machine and get back to work. You obviously have lots of bandwidth, which will be really great if you're integrating with any other cloud service, Frame.io or whatever. And it often gives you, may have access to different licensing models in the cloud. If some software you're using is in the Amazon Marketplace or built into an AMI, then that may give you a different pipeline as a path to using that software.
Great. All right. Next question.
From Rupert McRae in Dallas, and who was just speaking a moment ago. What are the advantages of using a DeckLink for output rather than regular video outputs, other than just differences between SDI and HDMI?
Carl?
So DeckLink, nearly all of DeckLinks, with a handful that aren't, they're all bidirectional. So they're also inputs as well as outputs. You won't find that on too many even high-end graphics cards. They're usually all outputs. Another thing is you can change color space per output. So you can have a 420 and a 422 and a 444 all on the same card going out simultaneously. So which is, you could do something similar via HDMI or via whatever other, display port, but it's just more better for production where you want SDI or HDMI outputs, that you can actually have this kind of configuration, inputs and outputs, software that can see them, and software that works with them, and also Blackmagic's own software that can configure them.
Alex?
You get an increased density, so you get 8 outputs out of one computer, so that instead of having just one HDMI out, you have a card that 4 or 8 outs, so that helps you a lot. As like for instance, for the Office Hours 2.0, we've got 4 outputs coming out of every one of them, and you can also have a standardized output. So if you need to match a video production, you're going to get exactly the frame rate you want to come out of it.
Rupert?
So a DeckLink won't present itself to the OS as a monitor, so it'll only work with certain applications. Or what typically are those applications, or what are some ones that don't talk to the DeckLink, which it would be nice that if they did,
Zoom. It would be really nice if Zoom talked to the DeckLink. Zoom can see DeckLink as an input. Zoom can't see a DeckLink on the output.
All right, next question.
From Brett Ramsey in Melbourne, Australia. We constantly have problems with clients paying late or not paying at all. What do you do to ensure you get paid? Does anybody ask for payment up front?
Carl?
So for me, they pay in full before I arrive.
Courtney?
Yeah, if I've never worked with that client before, I ask for payment upon arrival at the location or the set. And a lot of times they will say, oh, gee, we forgot our checkbook. But I usually make that apparent to them when I book the job that payment will be required on the set if they don't have an open account. After I've received payment, worked a couple of jobs with a client, then they'll have a 30-day open account to pay. And I've only been burned about twice in about 40 years. So.
That's a good rate. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I work with a lot of high-end companies, and they usually run on what's called net 90. So you might not get paid until 90 days after the fact. And then that can even turn out to be 120 to 150 days, depending on how they pass off their financials too. So in some cases, yeah, that's what I expect is 90 days. And then after 150 days, then we can start looking at legal action.
TJ?
If I'm doing a wedding, I have a contract that protects both me and my client. It tells them the contract says I get paid upfront before I show up to do the work like Carl does, but it also guarantees them that if I fail to deliver on anything, that they get all of their money back.
Rupert?
Yeah, so I mean, if this is an ongoing problem for you, then you may want to look at what your engagement process is in how you engage those clients, what is written down ahead of time, and because if it does come to legal anything afterwards, it's all going to come back to the contract that was negotiated. So it's important to have that stuff laid down, and what terms or amounts you agree to, that's kind of up to you. But if you ask for any payment, either in advance or a down payment or whatever, that's also a good opportunity to test out the payment pipeline. Like, how are they going to pay? Does that mechanism work? Do they have your ACH details? Do you have whatever pipeline you're going to use? That's a good opportunity to test it to get some kind of payment upfront.
Sky?
I've also seen a 50-50. So upon signing of contract, because oftentimes we will have expenses, we'll have crew, we'll have disposables that we have to take care of. So at least our crew is taken care of. But then on the back end, the second 50 is upon delivery of the final product, which is trickier now that the files are digital, but we often will put a watermark of some kind until we either see payment or get assurances that we're going to get paid. And yes, everybody has deadlines, and yes, the editing is always the last thing, and for some reason we're always out of budget at that point. So make sure you help your client finish the product and not get stiffed.
Alex?
For most of the clients that new clients that come in for us, we usually want a master service agreement, and then usually 3 successful events just before we, for anything large. I mean, we may do a smaller project for somebody without as much paperwork, but we definitely look at it like we don't know who they are. For large corporations, that's not practical. So you really have to be ready to take a 30 or 45 day minimum on a larger corporation. And as Jeffrey said, some of these large corporations / government agencies can be 90 to 120 days. You just need to know what it is, because you have to structure your agreements with your contractors to line up with the agreements with them, or you'll get your AR will get ahead of your AP, or vice versa.
Dan?
I think Rupert was ahead of me.
Oh, Rupert, sorry. Thank you.
I was just going to say, if it's a large amount of money and you did the work and they didn't pay in whatever time, and you've given it and you've gone through the process, sell the debt to a collector.
Dan and then Courtney. Alex.
I just want to say something really careful about that. Be super careful, because that's the end of that's when we decided we want to get the money like that. And we've never had to go to a collector. We've only not gotten paid for a small project once in 2,000 or 3,000 jobs. We've been, and that's a friend, so I just wrote it off. That was the so if it was a non-friend, I would probably still be paid. I would hand it off to our CFO, and she would, if I decided I don't care about that client anymore, I know that we're going to get the money. You just hand it off. It's someone willing to have a hard set of conversations and scale the organization. And if they're willing to just keep calling people above that person, I'm talking to that person, but above them, someone's going to get upset and get paid. You just never get to work with them again. So you just always have to know that when you go into a collection mentality, you just got to make sure that you're really ready to burn that bridge all the way to the ground. That company and everyone around them will not touch you again. So you just have to, so we take it very, very, very carefully. And usually we try to just set up a structure where it's almost impossible to get us into that mode. So, we want to pay 50% on sign, 25% halfway through. So there's only, and it's somewhere between 10 and 25% left when we go live. There may be a little bit of money, and, where it's not very painful for them to write the check either, just to keep it closed. But going into a collection mode, we definitely have had contractors go into collection modes like at 31 days, like they're sending mean emails and everything else. And I can tell you that that's a great way to make sure that we won't call you back. It's just, if you go into it, you just, there's some that'll just remind us. The most professional ones, and it's just got paperwork and we're trying to figure something out. But when someone sends an angry email at 31 days, which I'm not saying Rupert would do that, but I'm saying that we have contractors that have done that, but only once.
Right. If it comes to the point where I'm doing that, I never want to work with them again. It's just the best shot of getting any money out of them you can at that point.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm just curious if everyone charges for consulting before a project, and if offering that service discounted because they're prepaying either all of it or a portion of it, as to lock in.
Alex, do you want to respond to that, or should I go?
Yeah, I'll just respond to that really quickly. We definitely have given discounts ahead of time, like a 5% discount on upfront payment. Like if you pay us in 10 days, it's 5% off. It's if you pay, and a lot of that had to do with, we were growing so fast at one point that we were factoring our invoices. So we were literally doubling in size every month. And so the problem was we couldn't get paid fast enough to pay for the next job. And so it cost 5% a month to factor. So we passed that discount on. We found that to be problematic because clients would just ask for the 5% discount. Like they would say, well, if you give them the sense that there's 5% that you're willing to give away, they just want to take it away from you somewhere else. So having the conversation about a discount for faster payment just meant that their finance department slammed us harder on the next job. So it's that was the hard part of providing any kind of discount. It is dangerous.
Courtney?
Yeah, along those lines, you need, if you were handling employees that are, working for you as subcontractors or actually employees, always have enough cash in the bank to float so that you can pay your employees within 2 weeks, because that's required by state law. Even if you're invoicing the client and the client's not paying you for 90 or 120 days, you've got to be able to carry the debts of those employee salaries until you get paid. So make sure you have enough cash flow to cover your expenses for employees. And another thing I do is if I have an outstanding invoice and a client calls within 60 days or so to book another job, I mention to them that I haven't received payment for the last job, and usually that's enough of a stick to get them to pay that quickly.
Mark?
To Alex's point, once you go down the road of debt collection, you're not going to get 100 cents on the dollar. You're probably going to get 50 cents on the dollar, if that. So it's really important to have written into the contract something that talks about the payments, but also we found that if you give a discount for payment in certain time, or you try and turn it into some kind of annual or ability to have more than one job tied to a contract, that makes payments sometimes easier.
Great. All right, next question.
From Rupert McRae and Allison here on the panel. I'm seeing NAB exhibitors trying to feel out their customers on social media to gauge if they will be attending the NAB show or not. I've seen surveys in some cases. Are vendors getting worried? And what backup plans do you think vendors might have?
Alex?
This is after 500 of these where you never turn your mic off. Anyway, from the vendors that we've talked to, a lot of them don't want to go. Like what they're afraid of is not going will change their status with NAB about where their booth will be next year. So they're more worried about where their booth is next year. So if they dramatically change, you get points for how big your booth is and how much you spend and everything else. And that puts you as pecking order of where you sit the next time. So if a Grass Valley doesn't pick up the space that they had one year, the next year, the year after that, they're going to be in the back of the South Hall, and so a lot of them don't want to go, but they're not sure what to do. I think that it's a quandary just because Delta is becoming very, very concerning. They're concerned for their own employees.
Dan?
Infocom is doing that too, sending out these surveys. I've filled out a bunch of them. But even before COVID, Extron, for many years before, they just decided to stop going. It costs millions of dollars to get those booths in that Las Vegas space. They just built a building there. They put a restaurant in it. They fly people or to come out to their place to see everything. And now you can do a lot of it remote. So I don't think I'm going to go this year.
All right, next question.
From Ted Claudio in Quezon City, Philippines. Any suggested remote control app for multiple virtual presenters controlling PowerPoint, slides, or Keynote presented, displayed by the production tech?
Alex?
So what we use is Keynote. So it has a Keynote Live, and you can open up your Keynote Live, and so that's the number one way to do it if everybody's got Keynote. If not, we'll actually use a DSAN, the Perfect Queue, but then use a USB to IP connection back to our thing. So you can literally hit the pickle or the clicker that you would normally have in a show, and it will forward our slides on our end. And we've been able to do that as well. And then I believe there's a remote slide solution for slides, Google Slides. And then I know that Grant Whitehead also has a web-based version. And there's a couple companies that have made a web-based version where you can click on a web page and it will forward on a far end. And we've talked about it. Since I haven't used it, I don't have it in my head, but I know we've talked about it in office hours in the past.
Yeah, there's remote for Google Slides, which lets you use a code and from your cell phone or anywhere you can advance or back up the slides or start a poll. Anybody else? No. All right, next question.
Okay, from Rick Combs in Columbia, Tennessee. How many recordings have the remotes recorded, and where can I find them? And of course, the remotes being the Office Hours band.
Alex?
I think the remotes are in the midst of production for number 4. And go ahead, Jeffrey. You know more about this than I do.
Yeah. So basically, we've fully released one song. And that is, we're trying to figure out how we're going to put it on. Eventually, it'll be on in a YouTube area, and then I think a SoundCloud area as we're working on that. Song 2, the audio has already come out. The video will be very soon. That's going through color grading right now. Song 3 and 4 are in mid-production and will be coming out within the September time area. So right now you can fully watch 1 and then be able to fully watch 2. I think we're going to have the debut of the video at the end of the month, I think it is.
August
on
31st.
Yeah.
TJ?
And Victor yesterday said that Ken was also going to be putting a section on the officehours.global site for the remotes band materials so that people could go there and get the links to watch the videos.
Dan?
I'm holding out for the final release. I'm waiting for that.
All the cool kids do. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Panasonic recently introduced the KAIROS, K-A-I-R-O-S, video switching system that can process multiple IP video formats natively. Has anyone had any experience with this? And he put a link to the question there.
Oh.
There was an advertising that made it seem like a software that can run on AWS. I got really excited. Now I'm disappointed, but might be a cool product.
All right, I guess that's all we got on that. Next question.
Another one from Douglas Carmichael. How would you compare Wirecast to mimoLive?
Alex?
A lot more stable. So it's on a Mac. I think that it's a lot more stable. The hardest part from going from Wirecast to mimoLive, in my opinion, is that Wirecast is still very track based, and you get used to it feels much more traditional, and you kind of understand what it looks like. And mimoLive has a completely different interface. In fact, it took me 5 or 6 years to even be willing to use it because its interface was so distinct. But the interface actually makes it easier to do a bunch of things. So, but I find it to be a lot more stable than at least my previous experiences with Wirecast.
Jeffrey?
And unless this, Alex, you'll have to correct me, but unless this changed, mimoLive is a subscription-based model. So if you don't renew your subscription, you lose it. Whereas Wirecast, if you don't renew the subscription, whatever level you're at, which right now it's at 14.3, that's where you stay at.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, next question.
Also from Douglas Carmichael. I saw this interesting test pattern from an Austrian broadcaster, and he has a link there. What type of pattern is it, and what could the German caption mean? Jonas?
Go ahead, Jonas.
It just means connection not connected. Yeah. While I haven't seen that test pattern, it's one of the common ones that is in every test pattern set.
Carl?
So I've seen this test pattern used for collimation. So essentially you've got green and magenta. Magenta is blue and red added together. So essentially you can tune the light guns. That's why I've seen this test pattern used back in the analog days. I don't know how it'd be used in the digital days with LCD panels, but collimation for electron guns.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, and that pattern, it turns out, for video production is very hard to render. We usually use one that's just the purple and green, and we use it to interrogate our systems, because it just, in the way that it manages the channels, it pushes all of the systems harder than other things as it goes through. And so as a result, you can see things that aren't going to work. So that one may be harder than the one that we use in the US. We just use one, like top is purple or whatever, that magenta, and the bottom is is green, but it's not quite as complicated as that one. But it gets pushed kind of almost like white noise in audio or
Jonas?
And I wonder with the lines getting more faint to the right, if you could also check for resolution with the test pattern, because from what German text says, it's a static line between two studios that is not connected right now. So that could be a use case where they want to see what type of signal is coming out on the other side, or if they have an issue with resolution.
Okay, next question.
From Deborah Woodfork in Washington, D.C. Those with solid multicolor backgrounds, can you share how your setup works in terms of use of lights, background, real, digital, other tools, techniques?
TJ?
My background is real. I can actually touch it behind me here. It's a piece of upholstery vinyl, which I have hanging on a roll. It's vinyl because it won't wrinkle. Cloth will sometimes have wrinkles. This is just nice and thick and won't wrinkle. And I have colored lights that I can turn on and off to change the color, as I just did there. And they're hue bulbs, they're relatively inexpensive, and I can just change the color at will. Not to the extent that somebody like Ken Jordan can, but it gets me by.
Jason?
Yeah, my background is a 75-inch QLED display. As you want to be careful with getting QLED displays back there, because as you can see, I'm moving my mouse around, you'll get blooming if you have a lighter color object on a darker colored background. This is put back here because, and I can literally touch it because it's right here. But it's put back here because I can't actually hang any cloth right here. I'm actually inside of my classroom right now. So I can't really hang anything behind here. It was just much easier to move something on a cart. I have a Dracast key light right here, and then any sort of fill I'm getting in, you'll see a little bit more blue coming in, is actually from a window that's about 20 feet away. That's just reflecting sunlight into the room.
And Sky?
My background is climate controlled. Literally whatever the climate shows up controls my climate, my setting, because I do have a big giant umbrella here to try to block the sun. Yes, I will be moving back inside as soon as the weather starts getting cooler here, and then I'll be going back into the traditional gray background with a controlled lighting settings. But for right now, I'm enjoying being outside.
Great. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, and here in the panel, what do the last two characters in Panasonic PTZ camera model numbers typically signify, such as WP, KP, and WE?
Carl?
So the W means white, the K means black, the P means Japan and North America, and E means Europe.
Nice breakdown. All right, next question.
Also from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, should we have a time when everyone can bring their WLM meters in to synchronize them, like synchronizing watches?
TJ?
Yeah, we could absolutely do that sometime in an after hours. And I did post the exact file that I use into the office hours chat a few days ago. So if you go look for that, you'll see the setup file for the WLM meters that were originally established by Mickey and by Tucker.
That was totally me. I'm still here. Courtney?
I have looked at trying to synchronize them. The problem is that it's an averaging meter. It averages over a period of time, and latency between the different sources means that it never will be in dead sync with each other. You can get them close in the same ballpark, but getting them in dead sync because of the long-term averaging is going to be tough with the latency between different sources.
TJ?
We did a test using continuous test tones in one of the after hours things with 1 or 2 meters that were up at the same time. Todd Reynolds put out test tones at a specific volume, and just to kind of make sure they synced up.
All right, next question.
That should work. From Douglas Carmichael, what has been your experience? Sorry, let me start that again. What has your experience been with crew from an IATSE hiring hall? How do IATSE locals handle disciplinary issues raised by referrals or referents?
Alex?
I think that I know I'm so eating my own dog food. I think most people don't want to talk about union interactions on YouTube. Like that's usually and we've had plenty of good union interactions, but it can be misconstrued, and I'll let Courtney say anything he wants to say.
Well, the union I'm a member of, the local I'm a member of, does not really have a hiring hall. Those days are long gone. Those went out in the 70s and 80s. We do have a availability list, available for work list, which you can go online and choose from. But most people hire off of referrals. If they need a union person, they'll refer to another union, or they'll look, in the referrals list and look up the background of those people and make the choice themselves. The unions, at least the ones that I'm a member of, maybe the stagehands union still does it, but most unions do not act as hiring halls anymore, where you'd call the union office and say, give me a carpenter, give me an electrician, and they send somebody over. That doesn't happen. The client usually contacts the person directly.
All right, next question.
From Guy Cochran, what did Alex do to change the intensity of the practicals behind him and the color temperature too?
Go, Alex.
So I was having trouble with my lights. You might notice I'm playing them a little bit. So I have a couple extra of the Pavo tubes, but the problem is the practical lights. And so I ordered the Bluetooth enable hue lights, and mostly because the apertures were going to take another couple days to arrive. And I ordered one of those too, just to test it against these later. But there's a little app that I have on my phone, and literally I opened up my phone. It said, I said, look for light, look for, gave them a couple names. I grouped them together by just dragging them onto each other. And now when I move it, so you can see, I have a little color wheel, and as I move it, you'll see if I can do this all at one time. So you can see me just moving the color wheel around, and it's pretty awesome. So all I did is I disassembled the lights, put them, which wasn't, it was a screw, and then took the hotel lights out, put my lights in, and now I have control over intensity and color, and I can play with them a little bit. And I know that sounds very absurd, but the reason I did it, usually when I'm traveling, I use it as a way to test our small kit, and I'm very much leaning towards the idea of sending out practicals like this with our kits, like 4 hue lights to just send out with our kits, so that our Mac Mini can see them and we can fix color problems within a far end participant's house.
Dan?
I can only imagine the front desk call, Mr. Lindsay, your bulbs are for your room are here.
Are still here. Yeah, exactly. I can't forget them. I have purposely left the other bulbs right under the light so that when I'm packing up, I see them.
That's cool. All right, next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, how do you ensure mono compatibility in a stereo mix? From what I've heard, excessive use of wide panning and time-based effects can exacerbate mono compatibility issues.
Carl?
So there are a few things. In modern times, you want to use like a finalizer, which is from TC Electronic. They have essentially an app, when it used to be hardware back in the day, that allow you to actually just to flip-flop between your stereo and mono mix so you can hear. But recording, so there's a microphone technique called MS recording. So MS recording, you can pretty much capture anything, even a guitar cabinet in MS, and that will be mono compatible all the time, no matter what.
All right, next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, in a lot of 1980s era rock metal tracks like A Girl from Lebanon from Europe, you hear a characteristic crying guitar tone. How is that crying guitar tone created? Is it the player or the hardware?
Carl?
It's both. So Steve Vai is a very good one. So just look up Eventide Harmonizer. So the H9000 is a gold standard at the moment, but also technique on the guitar. So it's 2 things, hardware and how you play.
Great. Next question.
From Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham. I lost my TechRise USB external stereo sound adapter during a move. Is that still the recommended device to connect my Pile mic to my PC? And why can't I go directly into my PC microphone input jack?
Courtney?
You might be able to, but you might have to put an adapter on it. Most PC mic inputs are wired for a tip ring sleeve, with the ring being the positive voltage for the electret condenser. And since the pile comes with just a tip sleeve connector on it, it shorts out the 5 volts that goes to the microphone. So if you cut that off, you put it on with a tip ring sleeve, and you don't connect the ring to anything, a lot of times it will work, or you connect the ring to the tip, it will work.
TJ?
I was going to ask Roscoe, since he just joined us, there's 2 models of that, if I remember right, a newer one and an older one. Roscoe, can you enlighten us?
Yeah, real quick. The newer one doesn't need, you need to short out the center of the ring I'm sorry, short out is not the right term. You need to remove the ring connection. Edward Alvarez has done a nice little thing, and so I have a golden list out there that shows you how to do it. But otherwise, yeah, the older ones work great. The newer ones do have a wiring problem.
Rupert?
So what I tend to do, I have the tip ring headset here, and to get it into one of those headphone jacks, I just use one of these typical kind of what would normally be like stereo to breakout here, and I just use one of these, and it seems to pick it up fine.
Dan?
As far as another one, the Sabrent works just as well. I'll put a link in Mukana. You don't have to do that ripping apart thing.
Roscoe?
And there's also a Tascam model that works, but it is USB-C, just for anyone who's looking for USB-C connection.
Great. And so I just looked at the time because I was looking at everything else today. What do I do to stop the questions from coming in, or do I?
Yeah, we can actually pack
so
no, in the back end, what we're going to do is anything that has less than two votes, what we do is we hit the back arrow, and then you'll see a red one that I'll hit, and that'll send it back to the asker, and that will push the questions back. That pushes it back to their notes. So if they want to bring it back in, that way we're not just deleting them. Generally, we try to answer every question that's over two votes or more. So if they're at 1 or 0, it means they put it in, and so they so we push it back. We push it back to them so they can submit it on another day for the general discussion. If they have more than 2 or more votes, we're still trying to get to all of those. Eventually, that number will go up of what we're going to hang on to. And yeah, this is part of the hosting process that's the most complex, is slowly accelerating the pace of the questions and cutting people off, and like just not going to everybody as you get near the end of the hour to close that off. And it's probably the most challenging part of hosting, which took me, you're on what, show 4 or 5, and it took me at least a solid 100 to 200 shows to get right. So
you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, or like, I'm not ignoring you, I just got to keep going.
Yeah. Well, and that's the
that's
thing.
The nuance.
The nuance is that the
stop the YouTube.
Yeah, you can leave the YouTube open for a second.
Copy that.
This is an interesting conversation for folks, just for a second, a little inside baseball for folks when we're talking about hosting. So, and then I got to go into production. So, so the host, the thing is the host will feel like they're part of the panel, but they're not. The host is the advocate for the audience. So you always have to, as the host, your job is to serve the audience. You're using the panelists to do that, to serve them. So what part of serving the audience is to serve the panel. So you serve the panel in the sense that you're keeping it going, you're keeping the conversation going, you're making sure that the panel is acknowledged. And acknowledgement is a huge piece of hosting. So we're acknowledging the panelists that are there. So we're also acknowledging when we read the question and we read the name, the location, and the question verbatim, we are and not having trouble, not making other comments around it or whatever. We're acknowledging the person that asked that question. But the way we acknowledge the audience is that our job is to move that conversation forward. And generally, what that means for a host is that you have to pull things out of people that are when they're not saying enough. So if they don't cover it fully, you want to pull it out further. When they're saying too much, you got to cut them off. And that's your job as a host, is to cut them off. And it takes it's to your point, Emily, it's hard because you know, and we have some, like, if I start saying, like the panelists know here, I think a lot of the panelists know that if I say yup is me saying you're done. Like, you know, like, and now some panelists hear that better than others. So, but as soon as I start going yup is me telling the panelist, you've said enough to get this going. The other thing that I do as a host that's there is that I will I try not to answer the question. So I will sit there and go, I'm gonna hang back. You'll see the only time I jump in to answer a question is when no one raises their hand immediately, because the other thing I'm trying to do is remove all the air. So I want everything to go like this. And so if the panelists don't put their hand up immediately, then I'm sitting there going, you'll even see me start to talk, and then I'll throw it to somebody, because my goal is to stay in the back end, you know, of that process, you know, and put all, as a host, my job is to push the panelists forward, you know, and to have them become the show. And I just glue the show together, you know, as best I can. So, but yeah, it's a super tricky thing, and you're doing great. You're doing fantastic. So I love having you do this. So I have to go to work. I'm going to go match cameras. And so I'll see all of you. I'll probably drop in to go live at, you can turn off the live